Chris was born in 1973. We moved out to Oak Park in 1978, and it was a great place to live then. It was sheep and cattle and not much else. And went to Brookside. Both he and Eric went to Brookside. They started with the after-school club there, first ones, and grew up all doing all the sports and all the great stuff that we did here. It was a great childhood for them, I think. He had this ability, even as a youngster, to kind of light up the room. He could make people laugh. He just had this ability that just made people smile when he walked in.
Eric and I, Chris's younger brother, were in the same grade. And Eric and I were kind of always at each other when we were younger, and we became really good friends through sports, and we're always competing. And through that, I kind of got to know Eric and then Chris even more. Chris was a senior when I was in 8th grade.
Got into high school, participated in sports, and they had the plays that they do at the high school, and he really loved them. He loved the natural high that he got from acting, I think. And I mean, if you go back and look at some of the older plays, you could see Chris. He always, when he's doing the hand jive or something like that in Grease or whatever, he really enjoyed it. After high school, he helped us in some ways. He got a job, and then he went to Moore Park. He went there for 2 years. And some of his friends went to the University of Arizona, and he asked if he could go there, and I said, you got to get in, and he did get in, thankfully, and it was a great school. University of Arizona was great. Everything they did was wonderful.
I am Amy Hedrick, and I grew up in Westlake Village, and I met Chris actually it was at the Sport House gym. It's no longer there, but we also had mutual friends, and we just started going out together. We just clicked, and he asked me out, and then from that point forward, we dated for about 2.5, 3 years.
One thing I told him the last night that I saw him is, I grabbed him and I hugged him, and it was just a great evening. He was meeting Amy, and he was so excited about how everything was coming to pass, and all the work that he had done, and how he had hung in there, because Chris was not the greatest student in the world, but he persevered, and he just kept on going and going and going, and I think he was proud of himself, and I think that really came out. But I was so thankful that I had the opportunity that last night that I saw him to tell him how proud I was of what he had accomplished. We had dinner in Santa Barbara, and Amy joined us it was Valentine's Day, and Amy joined us for dinner.
It was just a really great night, so long ago, but it was very special. It was a very unique evening. We were getting close to graduating from college, and it was kind of a bonding moment with Chris's parents and Chris and myself, and it was kind of I think a symbol of the future that we were going to share, and it was, we were kind of getting to that point where we were talking about being together in the future and things like that. So I think the family dinner was really a symbol of what's to come, or what was going to come.
They went off to San Luis Obispo. We came home. We went to bed the next night, and about, I want to say around 4 o'clock in the morning, I was woken up, and I heard this noise outside, and I kind of looked outside, and of course I didn't have my glasses on, so I couldn't really see very well, but I noticed somebody with a flashlight looking at our number on our street. And so I came downstairs, I opened the door, and there were 2 impeccably dressed sheriffs. The police said to me, he said, do you have a son, Christopher? I said, yes, I do. And he said, I'm sorry to inform you your son was killed in an accident. And I said, no way. I said, can't be. I said, my son was in San Luis Obispo. And he said, I'm sorry, sir, to inform you that that's where the accident occurred. The police found out a little bit more. They called San Luis Obispo, and basically they found out that what time the accident occurred, where it occurred, and there was speculation that the other driver was a DUI, drunk. And subsequent information found out that he was about a .26, which is roughly 3 times the legal limit. And we had also found out that the day before he had lost his license for a prior DUI, and he should not have really been out driving. He was driving in the neighborhood of 95, 96 miles an hour in a residential area, which was probably 35 miles an hour speed limit, I would say. He was on the wrong side of the road. What happened is that Chris was coming from San Luis Obispo onto Los Osos Highway. He turned right, and I imagine what would happen, and he was going to Amy's apartment or house that they rented, which is maybe a couple hundred yards further up the road. And Chris made the right-hand turn. I would imagine he probably looked over his left shoulder, started to switch to get over to the middle lane because he had to have turned left. And about the time he got into the middle lane, a car was coming at him at 90-something, 95 miles an hour, and he probably had enough time to say, oh shit. And that was it. There were a total of 4 people in the car. Chris was driving. Marcia McKindo was the passenger. Amy was in the back right-hand side, and then Denise Waters, who, again, a friend of Amy's, was in the left side.
It was a head-on collision, and he was .28 blood alcohol level. And so he hit us head-on, and I don't remember any of that, but I woke up and knew that something had occurred. We were under a car. Under the Bronco. The Bronco was on top of us. And I knew that Chris was not okay, and Denise was not okay. She was on top of me. And Marcia, the girl that was in front of me, the other survivor of the accident, was pinned underneath the dashboard.
Denise went flying forward and hit her head on the rear view mirror. And although she was alive, she was dead. Chris was killed instantly, broke his neck, and his aorta valve snapped.
So I woke up and Chris's head was on the steering wheel and the horn was going off. And I remember the fire department, and I remember the chaos, and I remember the smell, and I remember there was oil on the ground, and so the fire department was really worried about that, about a fire, and it was a lot of activity, obviously a lot of rushing. And they pulled me out the window. I didn't see what they did with Christopher or Denise, and they put me in the ambulance and Marcia in the ambulance after like 45 minutes of trying to get her out of the car. And all I remember saying was, "Is Chris okay? Is Chris okay?" And they said I went into a shock mode where I kept asking the same question over and over and over again. And I think deep in my heart, I knew that he wasn't okay.
The scene was kind of eerie. It was a misty, wet night. And I guess people come out. Somebody came out who I guess one of them used to be a nurse or a doctor or a nurse, or somebody came out and kind of helped Amy and Marcia. The other guy survived. He had some injuries. yeah, the driver of the other car had injuries, and
I got a phone call when I was living in the dorms, and it was from my sister. And you know, anytime you get that call from a family member that's in the middle of the night or at some odd hour, you know something's wrong. And I can remember, you know, she was crying pretty hard, and she was pretty upset, and she barely could get the words out. And when she did, I don't think anybody really comprehends what someone just told you when they tell you that, you know, a good friend or family member died. It takes, you know, at least a few minutes for it really to register what happened, and you keep wanting to ask, you know, are you sure? You know, are you sure that happened? Because it just doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. And then when it set in, you know, I was pretty upset. I can remember sitting in my dorm room, and I just kind of sitting there. It must have been 5 in the morning, and I just remember getting up and grabbing my keys and starting to drive home. I finally got back here, and it probably took me about 8 hours when it should have taken me 6. And then I walked up to the door, and I thought, you know, God, this is going to be really hard. Talk about the person you probably competed against most, the person you butted heads with most in your life, and that was Eric and I. And you know, he just he lost it, and he grabbed onto me, and he dropped to his knees, and he was just a mess. And you know, to see probably one of the strongest people you know break down that badly was the hardest thing I've ever had to go through. And
a few days later, we had the funeral, which was at St. Maximilian.
It was actually absolutely horrifying. It was absolutely horrifying to see, or to just be in the room of someone who was alive one minute and gone the next at such a young age. It was like the worst nightmare that you could ever have.
And to this day, it was a beautiful ceremony, a wonderful turnout. In fact, they said that the first time that they can remember, there was going from St. Maximilian's to the cemetery was bumper to bumper, because there were so many people.
People that haven't been through this don't understand the level of horror that was felt. So it's hard to describe. But that was a very difficult time.
All of Chris's friends and people from Arizona and all over the whole state came. I mean, Chris made a lot of friends. I mean, there were people that he worked with. Teachers came from the University of Arizona. Of course, Oak Park High School had a great contingency of teachers, and which is in the middle school and the grade school. And
everyone came up with their stories about how funny Chris was, and all the funny stories about him and the goofy things that he would do. So it lightened it up a little bit. But for us, they played our song that we wanted to have in our wedding, and it was not something that I had expected to be played at the funeral. So it was a shock, and again, it was just a horrifying experience.
Initially, the hardest parts were the nights. I can't tell you how horrific they were, you know, when your wife is crying every single night. And then you think about the fact that this is a finality, that you will never, ever see your child again. This wonderful young man that had nothing but promise, so much ahead of him. We had done everything that we had asked of him, and that was taken away from him and partly of us.
I was so stricken by grief and shock and despair, and all of my dreams at that point of what my life would be, even this dream that we had of what our kids' names would be and things like that, was gone.
Chris would have had an outstanding career. He would have been married. He would have had 2 or 3 kids, 2 or 3 kids by now. I would have been a grandparent, all of which I don't have. I can't watch him go play baseball or or any of that stuff because I don't have it.
It was just an awful time, just absolutely an awful time, and dealing with that, I think is something for the community. Has really helped awareness of drinking and driving. But I'll tell you what, it was such a senseless thing. I mean, you take somebody who's so much potential, and he was so loved by everybody in Oak Park, and one guy makes some stupid mistake and takes that life away from, not just his family but his friends and the whole community, and takes the future of that kid away. It's something you try not to think about, but you can't help but think about.
It's really important to talk about alcohol at an early age, before something like this happens. There have been other stories that I've heard of where, really traumatic things have happened, and it could have been resolved by just having a conversation. I mean, parents can be present on the baseball field and they can be present on the basketball courts, but I think what really matters is to sit down and share with them a story like this and talk to them about being careful on the road, but also being careful themselves, and just having an early conversation about alcohol.
What my whole point is of what I do is to save any kid's life that I can.